Lesson 9. Fundable Event Timeline, Valuations, and Exit. For this lesson, you'll need to take a moment to consult with your crystal ball. What does it say about the future of your company? Who's doing what to make that happen? You need to show investors and other shareholders, boards of directors, and leadership teams your intended path for the company and how these decisions will impact the value of the company. Tracking value creation, value erosion, and value destruction is important. The difference between the three is often determined by the quality of the planning and execution by your team. Of course, you want to create value and not erode or destroy it, but you need to develop the skill of tracking how different paths in the company do one or the other, so that you can defend your decisions. So, does your crystal ball show you and your team swimming in a pool of money? I hope so. By the end of this lesson, you will better understand ways to plot the value impact of company activities, how to think about the valuation of your company, and how to think about potential exits. This company is not till death do you part, it's till payoff do you part. Stakeholders like to see that you understand more than just the current state of your company. They want to know that you're critically thinking of future steps and how those steps will affect the value of your company. As an entrepreneur, you need to always be looking forward as well as knowing where your company stands today. All right, so your crystal ball isn't showing the results you want. Maybe you should consult your computer instead. Take the Gantt chart that you built earlier, along with the cash flow, and put them together on one page. Put the Gantt chart at the top half of the page and the cash flow at the bottom half of the page. Line up the months on both the Gantt chart and cash flow so that they're perfectly lined up. This way, an investor or board member can look at it and see that the activities that you're showing in the Gantt harmonize with the numbers that you're showing in the cash flow. Wow, now isn't that a beauty? Next, highlight the moments of completion on each of the activities on the execution timeline Gantt chart. Each highlighted completion moment is a milestone. Don't celebrate all those milestones just yet. Not all milestones are equal. Most simply indicate that you finished what you started. The most important milestones are those that prove that you were right, because these milestones prove that you increased the value of the company and signal to investors and the board of directors that you are worthy of funding. These successful milestones are referred to as fundable events. So, before you imagine yourself swimming in that pool of money, imagine a chart full of fundable events. Examples of milestones that are not fundable events are finishing the business plan and financials, securing a relationship with lawyers and accountants, hiring key employees, etc. These steps are tedious, but they aren't going to rake in the cash. Examples of milestones that are fundable events would be completing an MVP or prototype that can do the amazing new feature that you dreamed about, something that no one else has been able to do before. Another fundable event would be when a qualified investor who's not a friend or family member actually puts money into the company, when people who are not your friends and family buy the product in the open market without your involvement. In other words, first revenue as learnt in step 8 and so on. Gotta love your friends and family, but unfortunately, the larger market is what matters here. The achievement of fundable events creates a lift in the value of the company. The more you achieve, the more valuable your company. In short, the more fundable events, the better. Here are a few events that could be value creative for the company and signal to investors that you are fundable. Proof that you can build a viable product that works, which pretty much means an actual working product. Proof in the form of intellectual property IP protections such as patents. Protected IP is valuable and helpful. Note that filing patents is valuable, but not as valuable as an issued patent. Do note, not all issued patents have the same value, so investors will often have lawyers and engineers study the patent to determine the value. Proof in the form of a validation study from a recognized institution that your product does what you say that it does. Example, helping cancer patients manage their pain or relieving stress, etc. Proof that customers will buy the product. Example, a purchase order. Proof that you can scale and are achieving critical mass. Example, as measured by increasing volumes of paying customers who actually use the product. Proof that you can attract top talent. Example, the CEO or CTO of your primary competitor. Proof that someone other than your parents have put or are willing to invest money into the company. Having one actual investor magnifies the chances of getting more funding. Now, let's talk about valuation and why it's important. Entrepreneurs need to put a value on their startups in order to raise money. In exchange, they have to determine the share of the company they're willing to give away to an investor. Investors need to put a value on their investments to generate liquidity. For example, an investor might put in $1 million and take 50% of the company, which means that the investor is declaring the value of the company at $2 million. This, however, does not mean that the company is worth $2 million now. You probably could not sell it for that amount. Valuation at the early stages is a lot more about the growth potential as opposed to the present value. Early-stage investors are typically investing in what they believe will become the future value, which is based on the value of your idea and planning and their trust in you and what you're doing. It's a relative science, and there is no one definitive method to calculate valuation. The biggest determinants of your startup's value are the market forces of the industry and sector in which it plays, the size of recent exits of similar offering companies, the willingness of an investor to pay a premium to get into a deal, and the level of desperation of the entrepreneur looking for money. There are several ways to establish the early-stage valuation of your company. One way is the comparable transactions method. Investors will look at comparable startups to yours. They look at what money the other startups have raised in exchange for what percentages of ownership, performance in the market, and exits. The second way is the discounted cash flow method. Assuming that your startup brings in a certain amount of cash every year, you can safely say that the current value of the startup is the sum of all the future cash flows. Investors take your cash flow and discount it until they believe that the number, known as terminal value, fairly represents the value of your company. The exercise is common, but is largely artificial. Although, at the early stages of your company, the real value may also not be truly reflective. The third way is the venture capital method, which focuses on the investor's return on the investment. For example, if an investor thinks that your startup can be sold for $100 million and he or she is looking for a 20-fold return. Based on these two elements, the investor can determine the maximum price they're willing to pay. In most cases, dilution of shares is accounted for. Here's what we recommend. Step 1. Figure out how much money you need to grow to a point where you'll show significant growth and raise the next round of investment. The more fundable events you achieve, the easier it becomes to establish a true and defendable value on your company. As soon as you have an asset ranging from equipment to source code to purchase orders and customers, those will be used to estimate your company's value. As you achieve more fundable events, the value of the company increases. Let's say that number is $100,000 to last you 24 months. Your investor does not have a lot of incentive to negotiate you down from this number. Why? Because you showed that this is the minimum amount you need to grow to the next stage. If you don't get the money, it is unlikely you'll grow, and that is definitely not in the investor's interest. So, let's say the investor is convinced an amount of the investment is set at $100,000. Step 2. Next, we need to figure out how much of the company to give to the investor. It should not be anything more than 50% because that will leave you, the founder, with little incentive to work hard. Also, it should not be 40% because that will leave very little equity for investors in your next round of funding. Up to 30% would be reasonable if you're getting a large chunk of seed money. In this case, you're looking for only $100,000, a relatively small amount. Chances are you'll probably give away anything between 10 and 20% of the company. Let's say you settle for 20%. Step 3. An investment of $100,000 at a 20% equity puts the valuation at $500,000. If you offer a smaller amount of equity for the same investment, then your valuation will be a lot higher. For instance, if you gave away 10% for $100,000, your valuation would essentially be $1 million. So, what will your final valuation be? Well, an investor is willing to give more if you can prove that you're in an exciting, emerging sector, you have an excellent management team, you have a functioning product, and a proven business model. On the other hand, if sector is highly commoditized, your management team has no track record, product has no customer validation, then getting an investor, let alone a good valuation, will be hard. Remember, it's just as much about the journey as it is the destination. Many less experienced entrepreneurs feature a potential exit too prominently in their planning. Although making your fortune with your company is a very exciting prospect, the most powerful exit that produces the greatest wealth is not a company that lives its life exclusively to exit. The greatest wealth production happens when a company has a long and powerful future ahead of it. So, plan and take action for a long and healthy future of value creation, then exit only when the time is right. In the famed dot-com era, the idea of exit was distilled to a single type, the initial public offering, or IPO. Most people don't fully understand the purpose of an IPO, how they work, and whether or not an IPO is an ideal way to exit. An IPO is designed to raise money for the company so that it can expand product offerings and expand into markets, etc. It's not designed to exit shareholders, even though it's used that way. Less experienced entrepreneurs still enthusiastically lead with the message of an IPO as their intended way to exit when other options are often better suited. According to an article in Forbes, the number of startups that have gone public in the US over the past decade is down about 75% from the previous decade. The current percentage of startup exits is about 10%. An experienced investor, shareholder, and board member will likely see your message to exit via IPO as representative of your lacking depth, experience, and market research. Here are a few things to consider. There are 3 basic parties involved in an exit of a company: the shareholders, the founder, and the company itself. The 3 perspectives of an exit are important to understand because they're not necessarily the same. The company's ideal exit. It might be in the company's best interest to never be acquired. It could be that the company will achieve its best and fullest potential if given ample time to grow and build strength upon strength. Alternatively, it might be in the company's best interest to be acquired sooner rather than later so that it can take advantage of a larger company's workforce, deep pockets, and economic power, as well as mature worldwide distribution network, etc. Every company is different, and you need to think about what might be in your company's best interest. Consider how you want the business to develop, and if an exit would help you meet these goals. Note that an optimal exit for the company may not be the same as an optimal exit for the investor, shareholders, or the founders. The founder's ideal exit. First-time founders will sometimes make the mistake of telling investors that they want to stay in the company for the rest of their careers. Although this might be true, less experienced entrepreneurs will say this, hoping to demonstrate enthusiasm and commitment. But this message actually is unsettling to investors and potentially other founders because they don't want to stay vested in the company for the rest of your life. They're investing and getting involved so that they can make money and get out on top after a few years. The best answer to give an investor is that you will exit in whatever way and at whatever time is in the best interest of the investors. Of course, most founders want to exit to gain financial security and minimize risks, while ensuring the core team that built up the company is well rewarded. The shareholders' ideal exit. Investors and shareholders need to understand how and when they will get their return on investment. Different investors have different timelines and expectations, so do your homework. It could be that a recapitalization, recap, would be best for everyone concerned. This is when you bring in new money and new investors. New investors, or possibly a second fund of your current investors, would come in and buy out your current investors. This would allow your company to continue on its own and yourselves to stay involved. Sometimes founders exit on a recapitalization. Sometimes the founders and/or employees could be the recapitalization investors who buy out the current shareholders. There are many combinations and ways to structure an investment. It could even be that a merger and/or acquisition, M&A, would be the best for everyone concerned. If another company buys your company, there would be some combination of cash and ownership in the acquiring company. There are many possibilities. It could be that an initial public offering, IPO, would be the best. If you have 4 profitable quarters, healthy numbers, and a healthy company, then maybe the board and shareholders would vote in favor of going public. There are other options, but the point is that you need to bias your answer to the best interest of the investors and shareholders. The one thing to note is, despite all the options, it's important to remain true to your vision, yet also realistic. Just like selling your house, there will never be any guarantee of the right price or the perfect time. If the offer and conditions surrounding the offer feels right, take it. Many first-time founders fall in love with the business and find it hard to let go. Whether that letting go is in the form of diluting ownership to an investor, expanding into a new market, or any other activity that will bring change to the structure and running of the business. They experience inertia because of the attachment they have developed for the business. Just like an overprotective parent who refuses to let the child down to learn how to walk for fear of the child falling, a founder that is overcautious and not prepared to take calculated risks may never see his or her business reach its maximum potential. At this stage, some of you might feel that you might over or undervalue the company. Be conservative. Use mathematics as much as possible. Put forward your best estimates for what is possible and what and when you believe different milestones and fundable events will be achieved. Investors will tell you what they think the company is worth, and you'll need to determine if you agree with them or not. Ideally, you would get a few investors to give you term sheets on an investment so that you can see for yourself if the values are close or very different from each other. Most founders grossly overvalue their companies. It's common. Work with credible and trustworthy others to help you be clear-minded about what you're doing and the fair market value of your company. With exits, some of you might ask, I don't know what my exit might be. It's too early to consider an exit, or it's a waste of time. Unlike marriage, most investors and founders get into business with the idea of getting out. Investors get into deals with a good idea of how and when they'll get a return on their investments. Investors will also want to know what you're thinking. At this point, you shouldn't sign any contract guaranteeing an exit at a point in time, or the type of exit. Just think it through. What would be a likely scenario and how would it play out? Would a competitor buy the company? If so, who seems most likely? Would you recapitalize with the same investors or new ones? If so, has anyone suggested that they would be interested in participating? Would you target an IPO? If so, why? Investors don't want a puppet running the company they put so much money into. If you cannot talk about the impact of your activities on the value of the company, then investors and boards may not believe that you're the right person to lead the company, and rightly so. With this understanding, you and your team will never just do things. That is one of the most common mistakes in life and business. Perform activities deliberately that are designed to create value and use those critical thinking and planning skills. Very importantly, if you fail to get your house in order, you're on the path to disagreements and fighting among the founders and potentially with investors. Seek agreement and mutual understanding. Put agreements in place. Protect yourself and protect each other. When you have investors, you must communicate with them clearly and often. Poor investor management is a cause of failure in startups. Don't just take investor money and ignore them. You need to treat them like any other team member and make sure that they're regularly kept up to speed on what is happening in the company. Keeping investors in the loop not only keeps them up to speed with your progress, it also keeps your company and you on top of their mind. Investors are much more likely to mentor you or introduce you to their network if they're made to feel like an important part of your success. In summary, you need to understand the impact of your actions and activities on value over time. If you do not forecast the impact on value of your actions, then you're just doing things, hoping whatever you do is making the company more valuable, but your activities might not be creating value. Not the best game plan. A fundable event timeline will help with this planning, with the added bonus of helping you harmonize your cash flows with your activities over time. Not to mention, you'll have this timeline to show off to investors as your "you should give me money" badge. You also need to plan for potential exits over time. Plan and think in the context of the shareholders' best interest, with an understanding of the founders' and company's best interest.